Hey, everybody, welcome to the Sally Allen podcast. As you know, this platform is used for people to share their stories of resilience. And today I have a powerful, resilient story for you. Obviously, I haven't heard it yet, but I heard from Mr. John Orlando. I'm putting it out there. John Orlando said this is a powerful story, and I need to have Krystyna on my podcast. I've never met Krystyna. Today's the first day we're meeting, and I'm doing a lot of first in these last two recordings because normally I would interview people and I didn't interview you or last person. So I think I'm stepping out of my comfort zone. Krystyna, I'm so happy to have you here. It's a little introduction on Krystyna. I've got to read this because she's pretty impressive. She's a lifestyle fitness coach, fitness competitor, cocktail waitress, podcaster, hairstylist. I don't know what she doesn't do. That would have been an easier list.
It might be. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I'm so excited that you're here. As John said, that you have a very, very powerful, resilient story.
Well, shout out to John for saying that. John has really been a powerful and positive role model in this for me as well, because I don't really know if I would have stuck with podcasting if he hadn't been there pushing me from behind. So I really appreciate him a lot. So shout out to John. I'm sure I'll appreciate the little plug.
And I always tell him, John, you have a big heart. And he's like, don't say that now.
He's like, stop saying that out loud.
No, it's out there. Everybody knows it, John. Too bad. But thank you so much for connecting us. So what parts of your story are you sharing with us today?
So crazy, guys. I get so nervous sometimes talking about this still, which is so wild because the entirety of my own podcast is why this started. I don't want to say the entirety of it, but it was kind of influenced in a way to give me specifically a position where I can practice having a voice again and standing my ground and kind of owning my truth. And when I first started it, I was doing it for myself. I had just moved out of my ex's home. I was engaged and went through a really traumatic breakup. And it was ironic because I always felt like a podcast would help me speak. And I had been doing little shorts on Instagram in the past. And when I moved into this new apartment complex, they had a podcast studio there. I was like, that's really ironic. You know, when the universe just presents you with stuff to the point where you can't even look away because it's just so in your face. So I started practicing here and there in the podcast studio, just being in front of a microphone because I really had lost myself in so many ways. And to make a long story short, one of the podcasters here found me in the gym and invited me on their podcast. And so that's how I found Sticky Paws and met John and told John my story. He was like, you really should actually record. And so that's kind of how I wound up here. But through a very traumatic breakup, I realized a lot that just wasn't about how this breakup happened to me, but it showed me a lot about how I wound up in this position to begin with, what toxicity looks like in a relationship and how people get stuck in it and how it can absolutely ruin your life. And I really wanted to use my platform to enlighten others to what that looks like, and not so much about a breakup and not so much about betrayal and all of the trauma that can come with it. Yes, that's a part of it, but the main parts of it were how losing yourself can make you just spiral out of control if you don't have a sense of self. And looking into everyone's stories about where that comes from, because it stems from somewhere. And we don't normally do that self-reflection until something bad really happens to us. And that opens up our eyes to actually kind of dig deep and see where that comes from. Because when you can kind of find the root cause of why you allowed yourself to stay in certain situations, you can start healing.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you say is that there was a traumatic event and that led you to start your podcast and found your voice.
Right.
Do you want to share a little bit about how you lost yourself and your voice?
So I was in a relationship and it was a fast-moving relationship. I got engaged after about 5 months and I didn't really see any problems with that to begin with. We were very much in love, or so what I thought, and everything just, it looked so good. You know, everything looked so good on paper. It was everything I ever wanted. He showed me everything that I ever wanted. And now looking back, it was like almost too perfect. And I found myself with somebody who could not be monogamous. And from what I experienced, I felt so much betrayal. And coming from a place of having a lot of abandonment wounds from father figures and things that had happened to me in my childhood, which I'm looking back now and understanding that, but at the time I didn't really see it. I couldn't understand how somebody could hurt me so badly. I didn't understand how somebody could go behind my back so much and totally destroy the foundation of what I thought my relationship was built off of. Because when you enter into a relationship that both of you want a monogamous relationship and a ring is put on your finger, to my understanding, you guys are both on the same page.
Yeah.
And you just don't go and run off the deep end when something bad happens, like a simple fight. And also at the time, I didn't really know what narcissism was. I didn't know what a narcissist was. I didn't know what gaslighting was. Any of the terms that you can think of in relation to toxicity in someone, I didn't know what those were. I didn't know what emotional abuse even looked like, because I never thought I would wind up in a position to ever be with somebody who would treat me badly or maliciously behind my back. And we're not talking about like one mistake. We're not talking about a drunk night out. We're talking about living separate lives behind my back and doing this numerous times and lying to so many people, including myself for the most part. And I found that I was a very forgiving person, a very understanding person. And I don't want to say I was naive, but I really believed that it was a mistake in the beginning. But what I found was that when you see a pattern in somebody, it becomes more than a mistake. It is part of them. And whether it's something that they really understand themselves or not, you can't be with somebody who is repeatedly hurting you emotionally, spiritually, physically, mentally, any of those ways, because what happens is every single time they hurt you, you break down even more. And what's really scary about being with someone like that is the more broken you get, the easier you are to be manipulated, and the worse it gets. It doesn't get better. And when you are also with somebody who refuses to get help because they don't see what they're doing wrong and can't take accountability for anything that they're doing wrong, you wind up in this very cyclical trauma bond. And that's when you get stuck. You know, people will always ask, like, well, why didn't you just leave? And you truly will never understand it until you're in it so much that you don't even recognize yourself. You don't recognize what's going on anymore. And I had forgiven him so many times that I started disliking myself because I hated that I stayed, but I felt trapped in a sense, emotionally, mentally. It's so hard to explain because if that happened to me now, I wouldn't even think twice about never going back and just being like, you know what, this isn't right for me. I'm going to exit and, you know, be on my way. But when you're that deep in it and you've been like gaslit so much and you've been talked to so poorly and you've been just emotionally hurt, you start craving that feeling of someone helping you and fixing it, because that's all that you've come from. You've always searched for someone to make you feel better. So when the person who's hurting you gives you that, like those highs and that lows of like doing something really bad and love bombing the crap out of you, it does something to your brain that makes you addicted to it. And that's why they call it a trauma bond. And you just get stuck and like, okay, well, it's gonna be better next time. Or you know what, it wasn't as bad as last time. It'll get better. And they feed you with things like, you know, you're supposed to stay here and be my ride or die person. You're going to leave. And it really fucks with your head. And I got to a point I was also very embarrassed because we were very, very public on social media. So to me, all of these things that were happening behind my back were so blatantly in my face that it almost didn't seem real. I couldn't believe that this was happening. And I'd have so many girls message me and tell me, you know, what they knew. But my ex would be like, don't believe them. They're just jealous. They're just people on the internet. And it just got to the point where it was so much that I kind of gave up on myself. And that's when I lost myself. I was a shell of who I was. I was empty. I even look back at pictures of myself and I'm like, who is that person?
Right.
It's just wild. And, they say that emotional and mental abuse can be just as bad or worse than physical abuse sometimes. And I definitely can validate that statement because it gave me complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I wound up in therapy. I was having severe panic attacks. I was all over the place, and he expected me to fix it because it was my problem. It was always my problem. So I thought something was wrong with me. So I started getting help from myself. And when I started doing that is when I started waking up to being like, this is not right. This isn't right. And the more help I got, it opened my eyes a lot more. And by the time that I was starting to become a little bit more educated on what was going on.
So let's pause before you go into that part, though, because I feel like there's so much to unpack in everything you just said for someone who's listening.
Yeah.
Like there is manipulation, right? Physical abuse heals easily than emotional trauma.
Right.
Right? It takes a longer time to heal from the emotional trauma. Then there was shame, there was guilt.
There's so much.
And there was pride.
There's so much, so many emotions.
Emotions that goes into it, right? Your pride. And you don't sit there and say, I'm too prideful, or I feel guilty, or I feel this. It's just happening in real time, and you have no idea all this is happening. So now that you've slowed down, you take a look back and everything's going in slow motion, what would you say to someone who's listening to this in terms of look out for this? Like when you're feeling like this and when this is happening, like what advice would you give to someone, while you are in that? What advice would you give to them to look out and protect themselves?
If you ever feel like you have to walk on eggshells in your relationship to keep the peace, it's not normal. It's not normal. If you feel like you can't express how you feel to your partner without some kind of backlash, that's a problem. If you feel like your partner's denying your reality straight to your face, that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And the more you let that happen and the more you let your reality be denied, the more your brain is going to start being rewired, literally rewired, and you are going to start doubting your intuition, and you are going to start getting programmed to just receive the abuse and take it. And I know there's a lot of people listening who probably don't even think that what they're going through is abusive.
Yeah.
It's abusive.
Yeah.
And even to this day, it's been 2 years, I still sometimes inside feel like, are you being dramatic, Krystyna?
Yeah.
And I know I'm not. But that's how I was meant to believe everything was that I was expressing for so long. And eventually I got so sick of it because I'm like, this isn't dramatic. This isn't right. And no one should be being treated this way. It's one thing, I understand people make mistakes. I understand that people have their own traumas that lead them to do different things.
Yeah.
But like I said, when it becomes a pattern of events and you see what was going on around the corner, around the side where you forgive them, give them a second chance, and they promise to change, and then you see them not very long after doing the same thing behind your back.
Yeah.
That's manipulation. That's not an apology. That's not a change. That's not something that you can just go through over and over and over again. You will get stuck. And that's a really scary place to be.
So I have a question, though, because a lot of people go through this where they believe that they can stay and change that person. Did you go through that where you thought perhaps
100 times?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I knew deep down in my core that you can't change somebody who doesn't want to change.
Right.
They have to want to change for themselves. But I think that that's the fixer in me.
Yeah.
And I always want to help someone become the best versions of themselves. So if they show me that I want to change, I want to be there to support them. And I still would have done that. Yeah. And that's what I did the first few times, but I started realizing you don't want to change. Like this, you're doing this. Oh, you know what? Maybe, I don't even want to say that because maybe deep down somewhere in there, he didn't want to be like that. But that statement doesn't align with the actions.
Right.
So for me, that's really hard. But I do know that if you are, and I'm not a doctor, I can't diagnose somebody, but if you are any bit a narcissist or a sociopath or anything like that, you have a hard time connecting with your emotions. You don't necessarily feel empathy.
Yeah.
So you might tell me, you don't want to be doing that, but is that the truth? And how come I didn't see you breaking down and freaking out about me leaving until I actually did? Because until I did, you were like, there's the door, kick rocks, I'll find someone else. So how do you back up those statements with, please don't leave me, after I finally left after 3 years? To me, that has manipulation written all over it. And what really did it for me was when I finally left, when I finally had the strength to leave, I had found out about 2 women in the same week. One of them was somebody who was in very close quarters with us, and he lied about it still. And we broke up. I told him I need some time. We'll have a conversation, but I'm moving out. I don't want to talk until I can collect myself.
Yeah.
And he still lied about it. And when I took that time, I find out not only had he lied, he was still with her while he's still trying to convince me to come back.
Wow.
Just a week after all of this drama happened. And I was like, that's when I realized, I'm like, you are still manipulating even after you saw how much pain I just went through. You are still manipulating, trying to get me back while you're still having your cake and eating it too.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm so done with this. This is insane. Like, nothing changes if nothing changes. And I realize that I'm going to lose respect for myself at this point. Like, I've done what I can do. I've tried my hardest, and I told myself, like, I will always try everything I possibly can before I give up on somebody. And I know I did too much already. Yeah. So why would I stay any longer and hurt myself and become self-sacrificing to the point where I'm broken?
Yeah.
What good does that do you at that point? And I know people probably love their partners or think that they're in love with their partners, but somebody who loves you will not hurt you like that.
Yeah.
They won't.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But what you've been through, I don't know how you've gone through it, and then you've come out to be the person who you are. That's resiliency. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. You had started to talk about when you went to get help. Walk us through that process. I
had gently reached out to therapists throughout about a 2-year period, but I wasn't really connecting. Or so, like, when we had first moved out to Vegas from California, right after that was when things started to really get weird. And I had some over the phone conversations with a therapist once or twice. Didn't really do much, just wasn't the therapist for me. But there was a point where things started happening again, and I was like, we need to go to therapy. And I kind of gave an ultimatum because I got to that point where I'm like, I can't do this on my own. I think we need help because you don't know why you're doing these things anymore. So I think we need a third person to intervene. And he denied the request. And so I up and left. I left the house, flew to his mom's house, didn't tell anybody where I was going. And her and I sat and talked about it. And I let him just sit on that for a while. And he finally freaked out about it and told me, come home, please. I will go to therapy with you. And we started going for a while. And that therapist, I feel like, saved me because he was the first one to not only connect with me, but teach me about what was happening to me. Because the first session, but actually I'm going to back up, before I decided to just leave, the session came about, and the day of, he threw a fit and picked a fight and didn't come. And I told him before I left the house that day, I was like, this is very important. And he's like, you didn't give me enough notice. And I was like, no, we planned it 2 weeks ago when you came home after I promised you I would leave. You knew about it. I gave you gentle reminders about it. You know it's today. And it's very important that you show up. And he's like, are you threatening me? And I said, no, it's just very important that you show up for this. And he didn't. And I walked into that therapy session by myself. And my therapist was like, you're alone. And I just started crying. And it was really interesting because it was a man, and he made me feel safe for the first time in a long, in 3 years. I was like, I feel safe here. And I kind of opened up about everything, and he taught me a lot about what was happening to me mentally. And it was really scary because I was like, wow, I'm actually sitting in front of somebody who's saying you have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Something's wrong, but this is why you're feeling like this. You're not crazy. So that was really eye-opening. And so we started going for a little while, and then COVID happened and we stopped going, and things got better, or I thought they were better. But, at that fall, the end of that year, that's when things took a turn again. And that's when I left him, because it just resurfaced. It happened again, and just 10 times worse.
Yeah.
So it just really opened my eyes, because then I started really thinking back to all the times that I had put up with this behavior and just thought, I don't even know. Like, it's so funny now, because I'm like, why the fuck did I put up with that? But just goes back to what we're talking about. You don't realize it when you're so broken.
Right. I
Start accepting what you think you deserve. And I thought I don't know. I really don't know, because I would never do it now. But maybe my self-worth took a toll back then because of everything I had gone through. I didn't even know who I was. And like I said earlier, when you lose sight of who you are, that's when you're susceptible to a lot of abuse. When you really lose your sense of self and you don't know your non-negotiables, you don't know your own boundaries, you don't know at what point you do not go over your boundaries anymore for someone else, and you have to let them come to you and do the healing that they know that they need. But if they don't accept that, you can't make them heal any faster, and especially not for you. And if you do, all that's going to come with is resentment on their behalf as well. Like, you have to find a partner who's willing to heal with you.
Yeah, I think what you're actually saying is what I went through also. We tend to normalize what's happening.
100%. You find some kind of
yeah.
You'll rationalize it in any way you possibly can to make it sound better, to digest it better.
Yeah. And you justify it, and in your mind, you're like, okay, this is the last time this will happen, and it's not so bad. It's not so bad, because the alternative of leaving is scarier, because you have to step out of this madness that you're used to and the madness that you know. And what does it look like on the other side?
Right. And sometimes the more peaceful side can actually be scarier, which is so interesting to think about. But one, it's the unknown. The unknown's always scary. Right. But because you're so used to the chaos and you're so used to that like daily struggle of like, oh my gosh, what's today going to be like? Yeah. You don't even know what it could look like on the other side. When I finally left, I slept for 3 days straight. And I was like, holy crap. Like, why did I do that? And I realized, like, I've been in fight or flight mode every day for so long. And, I feel like somebody could maybe say that sounds dramatic, but that's how I lived. Mentally, that's how I lived. Just like always on edge, always anxious. And, he'd always tell me my anxiety is so hard to deal with. And it's crazy because without him, I don't have anxiety.
So walk us through how you found your voice. So I can see how you lost your voice, lost your self-esteem and your power, right? Being with him because he oppressed you.
Right.
Basically, right? He kept you down. How did you find your voice?
Well, what was also confusing was he was helping me so much with business that I misconstrued the two, where, yes, you were helping me, but you were also beating me down in my spirit. So it was really interesting because it'd be like, I'm doing so much for you, but at the same time, I'm also like ripping you to shreds inside. So, you know what I mean? It was really confusing, but the voice thing, I think, came from a combination of therapy and spirituality. And I've never been much of a religious person. I grew up Catholic, but I never was like never practiced religion very much. I had I had trouble with organized religion, but I never had an issue with sense of source and love and where that comes from and guidance from a higher power. I was just a little bit confused of where to reach for that because I wasn't even recognizing myself, like I said, anymore. So I started doing a lot of different practices to journal, to meditate, to just do things that could connect me with self again. And it started making me feel a little bit stronger. And every single time I went to a therapy session or had a session with one of like my spiritual like life coaches, I felt a little bit stronger. But they all came with a common denominator of getting in touch with who Krystyna was and what she wanted, because it was always about what he wanted, what would make him happy, what did I need to do to make the day better for him. I never put myself first, ever. And it's hard because I am a little bit of a traditionalist where like I like the traditional roles of a husband and wife and and being the nurturing, caring, like caretaker. But when that gets taken advantage of, that's a really big problem. But I was really confused. So doing all of that helped me. And I don't know what came over me, but that week that I found out about everything in the end, I just was so fucking done.
Yeah.
Like I was so done feeling like that. And I didn't even speak up about it right away when I found out, but I knew instantly what I needed to do. And I called one of my girlfriends and I was sobbing my eyes out and I'm like, I need you to hear what I'm about to say to you and I need you to hold me accountable. And it's really embarrassing. And I hate to say this happened again, but I need to tell you everything that I just found out and I'm not going back.
So 2 questions. One, I want to know who Krystyna was before you met this person. And 2, was that the first time you'd called someone and said, hold me accountable?
Before I met him, I was a little bit soft-spoken, for sure. I definitely wasn't this person. I was really soft-spoken. I was a hopeless romantic. I was always hoping I'd find my husband. Like I was just that girl who was, I didn't casually date either. I just was always hopeful that I would meet somebody and my life would be like able to start. I come from a widowed mother and I had a stepdad who was a little bit emotionally and mentally abusive too. So I think that's where I was always seeking that person to fill that for me. But I was always confident. I was always extroverted. I just was a little bit softer. I wasn't very outspoken. And I think that was the perfect target. I don't want to say that because I still think somewhere deep down inside this person loved me. But I was perfect to be molded. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So I was docile and submissive, but not submissive in a natural feminine submissive way. I was submissive in a I don't want to make anyone mad way, where I was a people pleaser.
Right.
Where that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
And what was your second question?
Oh my gosh.
Who I was before.
Before. And the second one was, you know what? It went out of my head.
Oh my God, me too.
I
don't know
normally
why.
write it down. And
I think you asked me like, when did I start something?
I did ask you when you found your voice. We talked about
Yeah.
that. But I'm sure it will come back.
Yeah.
But you know, to move forward, where are you now? Talk to us a little bit about your podcast, what you do, and where are you now? Who's Krystyna now?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I'm still figuring that out.
Yeah.
I really feel like it's a big compliment when someone tells me that they don't recognize me from what they used to because I know how they mean it. And I'm really happy to see the evolvement because I never want to say like I'm a fully healed version of myself because I think it's not a linear journey to being healed. And I don't think it ever really fully comes to like a place of ending. It's constantly like you unlock new layers of your healing in different stages of your life. I was just talking to my now boyfriend recently about how, you know, I thought I healed from all this trauma, but now I have my first healthy relationship and it's unlocked a whole new level, of healing and pain that it's so hard to understand because you find things come up in relationships and situations in your like now life where you're so happy, but you realize that there's so much pain attached to certain things and you have to compartmentalize it and detach it. And you can be in such a healthy relationship and something comes from your past to kind of just like snap at it. Yeah. And you have to understand where that comes from. So I would say that the person that I am now is a more evolved person, a more evolved version of Krystyna, but she's still healing.
Yeah.
But it's different now. It's more of understanding the root causes of how I actually even wound up in a toxic relationship and why I stayed, and how to apply the things that I've learned to be a better person for the next person I'm going to be with and for myself. And that's the number one, not even for the next person, but for who you are and who you are operating at this level. And I have wanted nothing more than to just help others along that journey, because I've seen so many women get stuck. And I don't even want to say women, just people in general get stuck in toxicity. And it is a slippery slope to losing yourself and getting stuck in that stagnant state of lack of self-worth, and a loss of your sense of self can keep you from thriving and moving on in your life and becoming who you need to be as a person and that best version of yourself. And so I get a lot of joy with coaching people, and all I want to do is help the feminine heal. And that's not to say I'm a feminist, because I think that there's so many men that even get a glimpse of my podcast like, oh, she's just trying to bash men. And it's funny because if you listen, I never do.
Yeah.
I never, ever, ever do. I want the collective to heal as a whole so we can have better relationships, better friendships, better relationships with our family, and heal generational trauma. And mind you, I'm no doctor, I'm no psychiatrist. I'm just speaking off life experiences because I feel like I've learned a lot in the last couple years. And so I'm on a journey of healing, and I felt like sharing it with my platform, and I'm hoping that I can bring other people in to keep that going.
So is that your takeaway, or do you have a takeaway for us today?
Oh, my takeaway from what I've been through is that you will find a silver lining in even the most unfortunate circumstances in your life. It's just a matter of if you choose to look at them or not. And it might be easier to be bitter. It might be easier to be mad and angry and salty and calloused. And it's okay to feel those emotions, but to stay there is not going to do you any good, and it's actually doing a disservice to yourself. So the quicker that you can come to terms with what you're going through and the mission you want to accomplish to heal and move forward, the faster and easier and more happy you will be. Like it's gonna put that on the fast track to healing. But if you stay stuck in that stagnant area where you just want to be mad and angry and you want to just hold up this like masculine shield and be mad at the world for what happened to you and play victim, you're doing yourself a disservice. So the quicker you can get out of that and take accountability for your side and decide you don't want to be the victim anymore, the power changes and your story flips, and now you are powerful, and now you can use your story and take back the power of it all. It's not what happened to you anymore. It's what happened and what you're doing moving forward.
Thank you for sharing, Krystyna. You're brave, and now you're a powerhouse.
Thank you.
And I love that you are giving people a platform to share their stories and to find their voice. Because my takeaway, as I say, it's never too late to start living resiliently. And my takeaway today is that you can actually literally lose your voice when you are in an abusive relationship. And if you find out you can't speak, as Krystyna said, she was stuttering at one point. She probably shared that personally before we started.
Yeah.
But when she found her voice, now you can't take it away from her.
Yeah, and now I have a microphone.
She has a microphone. It's just like, I love it. But thank you again for sharing your story on our podcast. And I want to thank our listeners. I want to thank Sticky Paw Studios and my friend behind the decks. I have to learn your name yet. But hey, if you like our podcast, please rate, review, and share with your friends.